This is a 10-year-old camera smartphone. Can it beat the S24 Ultra? Let's go. The Galaxy S4 Zoom was a camera phone in every sense of the word. It was a smartphone, chills, with a massive 10 times optical zoom camera lumped on the back. Samsung made a few of these. I guess this was the first phone version, but they did make something called the Samsung Galaxy Camera, which was a digital camera first with Android running on top of it, but it wasn't a phone. This was their first attempt at making a phone and smart. That sound is so good. This was their first attempt at making a phone and a camera mashed together. Before I compare the photos taken with this to a current day flagship, the S24 Ultra, I want to look at this because it's a lot of fun. Samsung decked this thing out. Even by today's standards, it's very overkill. The main lens, I guess, from nowadays isn't that large, but for back then, it was a 1 in 2.33 inch sensor that was 16 megapixels in resolution. It's got a 10 times optical zoom range that you can extend physically. It's not a digital zoom, it is a physical zoom that you actually can watch extend out in real time. It makes it a 24 to 240 millimeter lens. I love the physical control. This rounded sort of thing here on the back allows you to physically control the zoom from 1 to 10 times and anywhere in between. It's not a smooth zoom. It does have sort of stages that it will stop at, but it's still quite cool that you can control it physically. It's an f3.1 lens that apparently has the capability to do f6.3 as well, and it has OIS built in. At least a version of it. Now, it also has some other camera dedicated hardware, like a camera shutter button. Obviously, a full press of the camera button when the camera is not on will open the camera. But when you're in the camera, not only does it take a photo, but if you half press it, it will focus. 10 years ago, that existed on a smartphone, and a certain brand still can't get it right at launch. And underneath, down the bottom, if you remove this little cover here, it's a tripod mount. So you can actually mount this on top of something. Genius. Samsung think of everything. You also have, which was, I guess, regular for the time period that this phone's from, a micro SD card slot, which I have a 128 gigabyte card safely stored in there. Now, with all that knowledge about the hardware of this thing, what exactly does the software do? Knowing Samsung like I do so well, especially from 2013, this has everything. Auto mode to start there, and I guess start simple, had all your settings and info at the top, and you could expand it out. This is like, I guess, maybe a really early version of Samsung's voice control, and you can see how it works. Cheese. There was also settings that you can toggle the resolution. You no longer can do that. You can crop the sensor into different aspect ratios, but Samsung allowed you to choose a specific resolution. So 14, 8, it were all sort of in there, and it worked to crop the sensor and change the output. Also video toggles as well. And now it was capped at full HD 30 in terms of resolution, but you could do HD 60, which is 720p at 60 FPS. We'll go through some of the video and photos that this can take later on when we do the comparison. It has an expert mode, they're calling it, which I guess is a very early version of pro mode, but it was very confusing. The interface was not clear. There was like a program, there was a manual, and I didn't get what each one was meant to be doing. It sort of changed which settings you could access, and you could see all of them from every menu, but it locked them. I just didn't understand. At least I didn't try to understand it because it was just too much going on. And then we go into smart modes, which is Samsung's, I guess, name for all of their camera modes. And if you could think of one, Samsung had it. I don't have time to go through them all because this video could be hours long, individually demonstrating and trying out each one, but I want to talk about some of the interesting ones that I tried. There is something called a Smart Mode Suggest, which is the first one that you see. Now, it gives you a bit of a guide on screen to half press the shutter button, and then the phone will actually recognize the scene you're taking a photo of and recommend a specific smart mode that's available. So whether it be macro, whether it be landscape, and then once you select that mode, it adjusts the settings to take the photo. It's like a really early version of Scene Optimizer, except it's a bit more manual versus being just automatic. There is a best photo. Again, it's not automatic, it's manual. You hold down the shutter button and it'll capture 8 photos sequentially, and then you go back in the software later and you sort of choose the best one or best ones that you'd like to save. You've got best face, which is similar to best photo in that it'll do a similar thing, capture a series of photos and then allow you to go back in afterwards and pick the best ones. I can imagine this working really well for people who blink, for example. You can just get them to stand still. It'll capture photos really quickly, and then you can go in and choose the one where they're not blinking. There's something called Kid Shot, and I was really curious as to what this was. Turns out it will actually play a sound when you press the shutter button half, sort of get the kids to focus and sort of listen to the noise. And you can choose the sound to be either random or you can choose a specific one that you want to play. I don't know who even thinks of that in 2013 for a smartphone camera, but it's in there. There's one in there called Eraser. And when I was sort of going through and trying it, I couldn't test it out, but I will try it out maybe this afternoon when I head out to football. And this will remove people that are passing by your photo from the back of the photo. It's like an object eraser before object eraser. So I'm going to give this a shot and I'll insert that now. So I actually just tested out the eraser shot at home. I didn't get a chance to when I was out of football, and it's crazy good. As you can see here, I took a photo of my son holding up a book, and in the background was my daughter running around like crazy, and it just completely removed her from the background. And you can actually have it show you the object that it removed, but it does need to be a moving subject. So if it's just standing stationary in the background, it won't work. It needs to be moving. But the fact that this has like an object eraser or like an early form of it from 2013, crazy. There's something called Rich HDR, which is like a HDR mode, and it works okay. Now, obviously nowadays smartphones automatically do this, but in 2013, that sort of process, you did have to select HDR, and it wasn't something that was a given. And this does a decent job. You can see it physically capturing multiple photos at a time to then sort of combine them together for the better dynamic range. There's something in here called Sound and Shot. I don't know what the purpose of this is. I guess, again, it seems like an early version of motion photo. But when you take a photo, it will turn the microphone on for 9 seconds after that photo has been taken and then capture the sound. Take a listen. Which I think the idea is to attach sound to memories. Sound and Shot is going to now record my voice and attach it to this picture. Which I think the idea is to attach sound to memories. As I said, the whole purpose of this is to give you the memory, I guess, or you can describe the photo or what was happening, and you can watch it back later and listen to it. It's a shame Samsung don't sort of stick features like this through in their later phones, because you can imagine this kind of being a bit of fun to listen to a photo. You know when they say you can hear photos? This one, you can actually hear it. For each of the modes, Samsung do change the settings of the phone, and you can actually see them at the top, what those settings are before you take it. I like that touch. There is way more modes in here, and if it's something you want me to deep dive into in a video, maybe a midweek one just for a bit of fun, let me know in the comments and hit subscribe, and I'll maybe put something like that together before I have to give it back to my mate. All right, let's get comparing, because we've got a 1x to 10x digital camera strapped to the back of a phone, and you've got 4 rear cameras on the back of the S24 Ultra that can go up to 10x through digital zoom. So it'll be interesting to see the output differences. I'm going to jump over here. Let's get into that. So I am standing here finally in front of my Viewfinity S9 monitor. It's a bit of an overkill monitor, this one, especially looking at photos from a 10-year-old smartphone, but I've got it, so may as well use it. Looking at this first photo here, it is the 1x camera on both of them, and immediately the first thing that jumps out of you is the dynamic range. The S4 zoom just completely blows out the highlights in the sky and loses detail in the tree branches, whereas the S24 Ultra, it retains all of that, as well as the detail in the foreground. There is this, like, I guess, light reflection that's here on the S24 Ultra that isn't present on the S4 zoom, which is strange because the glass on the S24 Ultra is meant to reduce that, the glare. But detail-wise, in the foreground of the trees, the S4 zoom does okay. Obviously 16 megapixels versus 12, you'd expect it to have some sort of detail advantage. It's not much, and in fact, the detail is probably better preserved in the S24 Ultra, and the colors as well. Like you can see the colors in the green are very muted on the S4 zoom versus the S24 Ultra. Heading into the 10 times area, I actually think I prefer the S4 zoom's photo here, especially when you look at the background. It's kind of got that nice depth of field, whereas the S24 Ultra, it looks a bit artificial. Now, I know a lot of that's the post-processing that the S24 Ultra is doing, and it certainly brings out more color, more punchier color in the flowers, but the S4 Zoom has this sort of natural essence about it, and I kind of appreciate that. If I took this photo 10 years ago and I looked at it today, I'd be pleased with myself because I think it's actually quite an artistic shot. The S24 Ultra, whilst it might look better on an Instagram page, actually doesn't really look natural or real. So I think I actually prefer the S4 Zoom here. Jumping back to the One X, I really tried hard to get dynamic range on the S4 Zoom to look good. It just doesn't. Like, I tried a couple of times, not with that photo, with this one here. And I think what you can see is whilst this first photo, the foreground's okay, obviously it's overblown at the background. And I tried twice more to really adjust the exposure settings, and it just couldn't do it. So I think that's a big advantage of modern day smartphones, is the fact that you can get that dynamic range and the whole picture can be clear, not just sort of a part of it. But if you look at this thing in the background here, the tap with a hose attached to it, I wanted to test the zoom out. So I went all the way to 10 times on both. And again, without dynamic range needing to be accounted for here, I really like the detail and the dramatic nature of the S4 Zoom. They've done a great job at like subtly blurring out everything that doesn't need to be in focus and making it look really natural. The S24 Ultra, again, it looks artificial. It's like they've gone too heavy on the processing and made it look too colorful and bright and artificial. And I did the 5x zoom as well, and the 5x zoom definitely cleaned up that artificial nature and sort of removed it because it's the natural 5x telephoto here. But again, it's like, it's not too far away from each other. Like the S4 Zoom has that natural depth of field about it, and the S24 Ultra, everything's sharp and in focus and detailed and colorful, but it's just loses that sort of dramatic edge that the S4 Zoom has in that 5x range. Back to the 1x again, and I think this photo here illustrates a clear difference in processing. Like the concrete here, you can definitely see more detail and more color, whereas the S4 Zoom is more muted and sort of washed out. But the chair, I wanted to do something a bit artsy. So I went into 10 times again, and the S4 Zoom, it looks artsy, it looks dramatic, it's got that nice bokeh. The S24 Ultra kind of missed a trick here. Like there's the chair here, the back of the chair, you've got the nice detail, you've got the nice sort of reproduction of the bokeh. The S24 Ultra just misses out on that. It sort of, again, looks artificial. Heading indoors now, and this is where you can start to see the advantages of the modern smartphone, because it's captured the light and gathered the light from indoors a lot better. A lot of that's down to the sensor size, but the processing of multi-frame image stacking as well, like the dynamic range of being able to see outside, the fact you can see foreground and the table, that's the difference. That's definitely what makes modern day smartphones better overall. But for a 10-year-old smartphone with a dedicated camera on the back, it does okay. Like this is back to 10x just for a bit of fun. And indoors, it just doesn't handle stabilization very well if there's any sort of movement. Whereas the S24 Ultra does a lot better. That's sort of further evidenced here by this energy drink. The 10 times zoom on the S24 Ultra, you can see everything. You can see all of the detail, all of the writing. Whereas the S4 Zoom, again, you lose out on that. I then wanted to take some portraits or like photos of people. So I naturally started with myself because I was dressed in a suit. And the S4 Zoom completely overblown that background. The S24 Ultra is just better at capturing things with tricky subjects. I tried some sort of like portrait photography. So I did 3 times portrait zoom on the S24 Ultra, and I just went to 3x on the S4 Zoom. And I just can't handle movement. Any sort of subtle shake of heads or hands when you're taking the photo, it just completely can't handle it, as you can see from both of these examples. I then took a selfie with the S4 Zoom, which if you took selfies with phones back then, this is likely what you're getting, because the resolution wasn't high and it just didn't have a lot of like light that it could gather. This is the selfie on the S24 Ultra, and it looks far better, and that's portrait mode as well. Then shifted back to the kids, and I think the S24 Ultra is such a great photo. The skin tone's accurate, the colors of the dress and the suit are definitely accurate. It's got the natural depth of field, even though it's portrait mode. The S4 Zoom, if they didn't move, it would be okay. It's just because my son probably blinked, so it meant that it just didn't capture that movement very well. I wanted to sort of roll through the zooms, and this is a 2x. So the 2x portrait mode on the S24 Ultra, despite the fact my daughter's eye was twitching, is good. The colors are nice, the detail on the top is nice, everything looks really good. The S4 zoom is just too muted, too flat. You wouldn't be mad though if you looked at this 10 years later and said, oh, you know what, that did okay for back then. But even if we look in the background, you know, like the colors of the background are just far better reproduced on the S24 Ultra than they are on the S4 zoom. Then we went to the wedding, and the wedding was set on like a sort of, I guess, a farm, I guess you could say. So there's lots of wildlife around. This is at 5x zoom or potentially 10x. I can't remember now. But looking at these two photos, the S4 zoom is better. Like, it's just a better photo. I don't have to zoom in to really know that. The grass looks very different here on the S24 Ultra. I don't know why. I actually think it looks better on the S4 zoom. Everything about it, even dynamic range, has sort of held up better in this photo on the S4 zoom. Then sort of after the ceremony, there's some games on the lawn. The S24 Ultra nailed it here. Like, it's vibrant, it's contrasty. The shadow areas are actually shadows instead of just blending into the grass. The S4 zoom, again, you'd kind of be okay with it, but like the facial tones, the skin tones, it's completely blown them out, and it hasn't rendered them properly. And just for fun, I went in to 10x on my daughter's face, and I like the S4 zoom. It looks a bit soft in terms of its focus, but the detail is quite there, and it's quite artistic in terms of how it's got the depth of field. The S24 Ultra, is again really artificial looking, especially blown up to this magnitude. Then getting back to portrait mode, or like a 1x photo with the S24 Ultra, again, the biggest difference you notice here is skin tone. Like if we go in on my son's face, you can see the skin tone is well balanced on the S24 Ultra, whereas on the S4 zoom, it can't quite hit that if light's hitting someone's face. And then at the reception, well, it was just a bit of fun, wasn't it? Just getting in and zooming in on my face. You can tell that in lower light indoor situations, the S4 zoom starts to really fall apart. So this is at 10x. The S24 Ultra, not great, but the skin tone's a lot more sort of natural to the lighting environment that I was in. And that gets represented across all of the indoor environments that I took, like taking photos of food, for example. The food shot on the S24 Ultra looks far more appetizing than it does on the S4 zoom. What I do notice though is that the S4 zoom has food mode, and there is a difference in terms of the colors. Like slightly, you can see a bit of a punchier green, but it's still nowhere near as good and more as appetizing as what the S24 Ultra is. I wanted to see if it could handle candlelight, and the S4 zoom can't. And it also doesn't really reproduce colors very well. Like the colors of this sort of table, it was warm white from the candle, like a yellowish light. The S24 Ultra reproduced that. The S4 zoom kept everything flat because it couldn't handle the dynamic range of a candle burning. Heading outdoors for low light, because the S4 zoom does have like a night mode, I guess you could say. It doesn't do much. This is the S4 zoom's night mode. I thought that looked like a beach when I was looking at it on the phone screen. Turns out it's not. This was the S24 Ultra, and it's far better. Just obviously night mode, multi-image stacking does a much better job than what it used to. I tried pointing it at something else, and again, the S4 zoom did okay. Like, it's very hazy. The lights are sort of up everywhere, whereas the S24 Ultra obviously handles it a lot better thanks to that image stacking that Samsung brought in. Then on to video. And the S24 Ultra obviously can go up to 8K. This is not 8K, this is 4K. What I wanted to see was just like color differences and detail. Forget about it, full HD. The ball in the corner, as you saw, was far more detailed and colored better on the S24 Ultra. The OIS definitely is a lot worse, but it's not terrible compared to maybe what you might have experienced in that day and age. The thing I noticed the most is dynamic range. You can see that there in between the trees, it just can't expose multiple areas. It only sort of prioritizes one, which I guess in the time frame was fine for a smartphone, but obviously now know a lot better. And then heading into like a zoom video, I think what I really noticed with the zoom video is that detail-wise, they actually both produce really detailed zoom. The S4 zoom, I really liked how it was really cinematic. It created this sort of natural, artsy sort of feel about it, very dramatic video footage. Like here, for example, you can see that foreground is nice and in focus of the light, and then the background has this nice soft bokeh effect. It looks super cinematic. And even though it's full HD, I think you'll probably agree with me that compared to the S24 Ultra, it's actually doing such a good job here of balancing that. I really like it. And that's at full 10x zoom, which is the max zoom that the S4 zoom can go for. Say zoom more. And then the last one here is to do with audio and the microphone quality. So we'll chuck that on and you let me know which one sounds better. All right, I wanted to test the audio or microphone capability rather from both of these. I'm starting with the S4 zoom. I'm indoors. I thought I'd be kind and fair to this phone and just sort of getting my comparison ready, which you already have seen by now. This is the S4 Zoom's audio, and then this is the S24 Ultra's. Now, obviously, I would imagine the S24 Ultra sounding way better, clearer, more focused. There's more microphones on board. There's better quality microphones on board. But who knows? Samsung have done some crazy things in the past, as you've seen from some of the 10 times zoom photos being kind of sometimes better on the S4 Zoom. Anyway, this is the S24 Ultra. This is the S4 Zoom. Let me know in the comments which one you liked better. Obviously, it's the S24 Ultra. So look, obviously, a 10-year-old phone, despite its dedicated camera hardware, is not going to outperform a 2024 flagship. The biggest key differences is processing. And whilst this can do some good photos in certain situations, it just doesn't have the processing prowess of the ISPs of modern day smartphones. That being said, if you had this phone from 2013 and you took photos with it back then, you'll look favorably on the photos that you took. They won't be grainy messes. There's actually some good existence of photos that this thing can take. Hit subscribe to Table Benefits. Make sure you guys go check out some other videos, and I'll see you in the next one. You!